You've been lied to since the day you were born. Not out of malice, not even out of conspiracy, but because the people who taught you didn't know the truth themselves. They were raised inside the same illusion, repeating the same story, worshipping the same lie. That death is something to fear, something to run from, something that ends everything you are. But deep down, something in you has always felt, and the screen has separate areas wherein to. You've seen it in the silence after someone passes, that hollow pause where the air feels thicker, as if something unseen still lingers. You've felt it in dreams that felt more real than waking life, in moments where time slowed down and you saw through the cracks of this so-called reality. You've questioned it before, even if only in whispers within your own mind. What if death isn't what I was told it is? What if everything I believe about the end is wrong? And that's exactly where the lie begins. You weren't raised to understand death. You were raised to avoid it, to hide it, to fear it so completely that even thinking about it feels like a curse. But death isn't the enemy. The fear of death is, and that fear has shaped everything about you. Your choices, your limits, even your concept of time. They taught you that your life is a straight line, a beginning, a middle, an end. Born, live, die, game over. But that's not how reality works. That's not how energy works. And most of all, that's not how consciousness works. The truth? You weren't born into freedom. You were born into programming, a cultural hypnosis that began the moment someone pointed at your body and said, "That's you." And just like that, you forgot what you are. You were given a name, an identity, a role to play. You learned to color inside the lines, to say goodbye when someone dies, to mourn their loss, to believe they are gone. Gone where? That question alone would have unraveled everything. So they taught you not to ask. Instead, they built rituals of avoidance. "He's in a better place," they said. "She's watching over you now." Empty phrases. Illusions meant to comfort, not awaken, because the real comfort, the real truth, is far more powerful and far more dangerous to those who profit from your fear. You were taught to see death as a thief, a cruel force that takes everything you love. But that isn't what death is. Death doesn't take, it reveals. It shows you what was never yours to begin with. The body, the ego, the identity you cling to like armor, and when it peels those away, what's left isn't nothing. What's left is everything. Carl Jung understood this, not in theory, not in a book, but through experience. In 1944, Jung died, clinically, medically, completely. For 21 minutes. No heartbeat, no breath, no signs of life. But he came back, and when he did, he brought something with him. Not a fantasy, not a vision, a warning. He said 5 words that changed everything. Death is an optical illusion. Think about that. Let it sink in. Optical illusion, meaning what you perceive isn't what's really there. What you believe is happening is not the truth. That one sentence has the power to dismantle an entire worldview. Because if death is an illusion, then what does that make your life? What does that make your body, your story, your fears? And why have you never been told this before? Because fear is currency. The fear of death is the most profitable belief system ever created. Entire industries depend on it. Hospitals, pharmacies, insurance, religion, war, even time itself, the ticking clock that says you're running out, is built on this illusion. But Jung saw through it. He saw what lies beyond the veil. And what he saw wasn't hell. It wasn't heaven either. It was truth. Raw, luminous, terrifying in its simplicity. He saw that the self, the real self, cannot die because it was never born. And if that's true, then what are you? You're not a person trying to escape death. You are consciousness wearing a costume called life. And the moment you start to see that, the illusion begins to crack. But here's the problem. Cracking the illusion doesn't feel like enlightenment. Not at first. It feels like dying. Not the kind that ends in a hospital bed, but the kind that dissolves everything false inside you. The kind of dying that tears away the masks, the stories, the comforts, the distractions, until you're standing naked in front of the truth you've been avoiding your entire life. You fear death because you fear what it will take from you. But what if death is the only thing that can show you who you really are? Every time you've avoided that question, every time you've changed the subject, closed the tab, turned off the documentary or scrolled to something easier, you've handed your power back to the system that thrives on your amnesia. But not this time, not today, because today you remember. Something ancient inside you, older than your name, older than this body, older than this world, is stirring. You are starting to see the lie for what it is, a survival mechanism, a shield, a trick passed down from one generation of the asleep to the next. But you're not here to sleep. You're here to wake up. And waking up requires a brutal kind of honesty. You're going to die. Everyone you love is going to die. Every goal you chase, every house you build, every dollar you save, it will all be taken from you. And that's not a reason to panic. It's your permission to live. Because when you stop running from death, you stop running from life. You stop playing small. You stop waiting. You stop following rules designed to delay the inevitable. And you start showing up, fully, fiercely, fearlessly, not in spite of death, but because of it. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And here's the secret they never told you. You can't become who you truly are until you face who you are not. And who you are not is terrified of death. Who you are not is the scared child clinging to a story that was never true. Who you are not is the obedient adult repeating the same lie that's kept billions of souls asleep. But who you are is waking up, right now. And what happens next changes everything. In 1944, something happened that would forever shatter the boundary between science and spirit, psychology and mysticism. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, the man who mapped the unconscious mind, who introduced the world to archetypes, the shadow, the self, died. For 21 minutes he was clinically gone. No heartbeat, no breath, no brain activity. By every medical standard he should have never returned, but he did. And what he brought back wasn't just a story. It was a revelation so destabilizing, so explosive, that it was immediately downplayed, dismissed, and quietly buried beneath decades of academic distraction. Because Jung didn't describe pearly gates or angels playing harps. He didn't come back preaching salvation or warning of damnation. What he said was far more dangerous. He looked the world in the eye and declared, "Death is an optical illusion." At first glance it sounds poetic, mystical even. But Jung wasn't known for poetry. He was known for precision, for translating the unconscious into language, for dissecting dreams like scientists dissect atoms. So when a man like Jung says something as absolute as death is an optical illusion, he isn't guessing, he's reporting, and the implications are staggering. Think about what it means. An optical illusion is something that appears real until you look closer. It fools the eyes, tricks the brain, creates the image of separation when no separation exists. It's not just wrong. It's convincingly wrong. It holds you hostage in a version of reality that doesn't actually exist. That's what death is, according to Jung, not a wall, not an ending, a veil. But what did he see? What was so powerful, so all-consuming that it yanked him out of that other world and forced him back into a broken body? He described it later in fragments, as if language itself was too primitive to hold what he witnessed. He said he saw the earth from above, glowing in blue light, spinning alone in space. He was detached from his body, untethered from identity, yet more conscious than he'd ever been. The world he returned from wasn't a fantasy, it was more real than this one. It was beyond real, unfiltered by flesh, unbound by biology, pure awareness. And then he saw it. A massive black stone, floating in space like a sacred meteorite. Inside that stone, a temple, carved from a single block, ancient beyond time. And in that temple, Jung felt the presence of everyone he'd ever been, every lifetime, every soul he'd touched, all of it, existing simultaneously, not in linear time, but in spirals, in layers, in echoes. It was his life, and more than his life, all at once. Every version of him, every flicker of consciousness he had ever embodied or brushed against, converging in that impossible place. And just as he approached the entrance, just as he was about to pass through the threshold of ultimate knowing, something stopped him. A figure appeared. It was his doctor, but not the doctor from that realm, the one from Earth. And the message was clear: you must return, your work isn't finished. Imagine that. You've just seen what lies beyond the illusion. You've glimpsed the machinery behind existence itself. You've touched what mystics spend lifetimes chasing. And then you're pulled back, dragged into a body that no longer fits, forced to live again in a world of clocks and calendars, traffic and taxes, knowing that it's all a set. Jung didn't come back with enlightenment. He came back with urgency, because he saw the truth and realized almost no one else does. He understood that we live inside a trance, a cultural hypnosis, a lie so convincing we call it reality. But death is not what we think it is. It's not darkness. It's not annihilation. It's not a glitch in the matrix. It's the moment you wake up, the moment the dream dissolves, and the only reason it feels terrifying is because we've spent our entire lives identifying with the dream. The body, the name, the job, the story, none of these things are you. They are costumes, interfaces, temporary characters in a cosmic play. And when they fall away, what remains isn't absence, it's presence. Jung described it not as a void, but as a liberation, a shedding of density. Like stepping out of a thick, damp fog into clear mountain air, he said he experienced a state of consciousness free from the ego, from the false self, from the tangled narratives of survival. He didn't lose himself, he found himself. And that's the part they don't want you to know, that what waits beyond death is not judgment, not fire, not oblivion, but clarity. A truth so crystalline, so overwhelming, that the illusions of this world can't survive in its light. But here's the catch. That clarity doesn't flatter the systems built on fear. It doesn't serve governments or corporations or religions that depend on you believing that death is the ultimate punishment and that they hold the keys to avoiding it. That's why Jung's experience was never highlighted in textbooks. That's why his most important words, "death is an optical illusion," are ignored by academia. Not because they're untrue, but because they're too true. Because if you stopped fearing death, you'd stop obeying. You'd stop chasing safety. You'd stop giving away your time, your power, your dreams just to avoid an illusion. You'd start living like someone who knows the truth. That nothing essential can be taken from you. That the you beneath the story cannot be harmed. That the energy animating your body is eternal, indestructible, and infinite in form. And if even a fraction of people truly lived that way, the world would never be the same. You'd stop playing the role of the frightened consumer. You'd stop clinging to status symbols and superficial meaning. You'd stop making decisions from a place of fear and start making them from a place of knowing. Knowing that what you are cannot die. What Jung saw in those 21 minutes wasn't just for him. It was for you. It was a mirror held up to the deepest part of your being. A whisper that says, you are not what you think you never were, and when the illusion breaks, it won't be the end. It will be the beginning. So the question isn't whether you'll die, you will. The question is, will you still believe the illusion when it happens, or will you remember? Will you recognize the temple when you see it? Will you step through the door, not as the frightened ego, but as the awakened self. That's the forbidden discovery. Not just that death is an illusion, but that the one discovering it is eternal. From the moment you first became aware of death, you were taught to dread it. Maybe it started with the death of a pet. Maybe it was a grandparent. Maybe it was just a whispered warning, a funeral you didn't understand, a hushed conversation you weren't meant to hear. Whatever it was, something inside you contracted, a subtle tension, a quiet panic. And no one helped you face it. Instead, they gave you stories, half-truths and metaphors, padded euphemisms, anything to keep you from touching the truth, because touching that truth would make you dangerous. Society doesn't want you to understand death. It wants you to fear it. It wants you to see death as a failure, a glitch, an enemy to be fought, delayed, denied, hidden behind closed doors and sterilized hospital sheets. It wants you to see death as the end of the game, the moment you lose everything. Why? Because a person who fears death is easy to control. When you're terrified of the end, you'll do anything to postpone it. You'll stay quiet, obey, consume, take the safe job, swallow the pill, fund the machine. You'll trade your freedom for the illusion of more time. You'll let them sell you back your own life, one overpriced treatment at a time, as long as they promise to hold death just a little further out of reach. But here's what they never tell you. Death was never meant to be feared. Death isn't the opposite of life. That's a lie. The opposite of life is unlived life. The frozen, muted days spent trying not to die instead of learning how to truly live. Death is not an error. It is not a failure. It is not a punishment. It's a part of the cycle. The exhale to life's inhale. The return to source. Not destruction, but reintegration. And somewhere, deep in your bones, you already know this. Because when you see someone die, when you feel that silence enter the room, you don't just feel loss. You feel presence. You feel something sacred. You can't explain it, but it's there. That's the part we're not allowed to talk about. The knowing that doesn't fit inside textbooks. That moment when time pauses and something invisible shifts. So why does this fear of death run so deep? Because it was engineered to. For thousands of years, institutions have used death to shape your behavior. They built myths around it, rewarded conformity with the promise of heaven, threatened disobedience with eternal fire. They painted death as the consequence of sin, as the moment your soul is weighed, judged, possibly discarded. They made you afraid to die, and in doing so they made you afraid to live. Because real living is messy, wild, unpredictable. It requires risk, courage, the willingness to fall apart and be remade. You can't have that kind of aliveness in a society built on control, so they taught you to suppress your instincts, to reject anything that reminded you of death, aging, decay, stillness, mystery. We put our elderly in homes. We embalm our dead. We whisper the word cancer. We speak of passing as if death were a hallway no one really wants to walk down, but we all will, every one of us. And here's the twist. That hallway, it's not a punishment. It's the final classroom. But instead of preparing you for it, they kept you distracted. They filled your calendar, filled your bank account, filled your news feed. They trained you to invest in futures you'll never see, chase goals that vanish the moment you reach them, and spend a lifetime running from a door that has always been quietly open. And in doing so, they robbed you of the very thing death was designed to give you: perspective. Because death is not the destroyer of meaning, it's the creator of it. The reason a moment matters is because it ends. The reason love matters is because it fades. The reason you matter is because you're not here forever. If you lived forever, nothing would mean anything. But when you embrace death, not just conceptually, but viscerally, spiritually, intimately, something changes. You stop postponing joy. You stop deferring your dreams. You stop pretending you have time to be who you're not, and in that shift, you become sovereign. That's what they fear. not death, but the people who are no longer afraid of it. Because a person who's made peace with death can't be manipulated, can't be bribed with promises of safety, can't be herded into submission. They don't need to be saved, because they've already met the part of themselves that can't die. And that's the ultimate threat to any system of control. So they created a culture that avoids death at all costs, a society that sees grief as weakness, aging as failure, stillness as laziness. They made death invisible, hiding it behind hospital curtains, packaging it in plastic, sterilizing it with religion and science and business suits. But no matter how far they push it from your sight, you can still feel it, pulsing under the surface, waiting to be faced. And that pressure builds, shows up as anxiety, as depression, as addiction, as that hollow ache in the pit of your soul that no amount of success can satisfy. You think you're afraid of not making enough money, not finding love, not being successful, but what you're really afraid of is dying without ever really living. And that fear has been your prison, but it can also be your key. Because the moment you stop running from death, you stop running from yourself. You start to see clearly, not just through spiritual insight, but through direct experience. You begin to ask different questions. You stop wondering how to survive and start asking how to serve. You stop trying to control the future and start trusting in the cycle. You stop identifying with the part of you that's temporary and start remembering the part that never was, the part of you that has watched every moment from behind your eyes, the part that has never changed, the part that will still be here when the story ends. Carl Jung didn't just study death from a clinical perspective. He died, and when he came back he didn't speak of fear, he spoke of clarity, of expansion, of awareness freed from its container. He spoke of death not as an end, but as a completion, the moment the wave returns to the ocean, not broken, but whole again. You are that wave, temporary in form, eternal in essence. And once you understand that, not with your mind, but with your being, the psychological war against death loses all power over you. Because you can't control someone who knows they're infinite. You can't manipulate someone who sees death as a door, not a wall. You can't own someone who's already made peace with letting go. That's why they need your fear. That's why they guard the illusion so carefully. Because if even a few of us see through it, if even a handful of souls reclaim their truth, the spell breaks, and in its place something ancient awakens. Not rebellion, not escape, but remembrance of what you are, of why you're here, and of what truly waits. When the illusion fades, in the moment your body takes its final breath, something extraordinary happens. Not in the way you've been taught to expect. Not darkness, not nothingness, not a sudden void swallowing your existence, but something deeper, stranger, and infinitely more precise. At that threshold between the known and the unknowable, the illusion of separation collapses. And what rises in its place is not fear, but energy, not loss, but transformation. Your breath stills, your heart goes silent, your blood stops moving, and for a brief window of time, a moment so delicate it defies language, your body dies, but you do not. What remains is awareness without boundary, presence without form, a vivid clarity that no amount of philosophy or religion could ever prepare you for. You don't float away, you expand. You become what you've always been but could never fully see, pure consciousness, unfiltered by biology, no longer confined to the narrow tunnel of ego. Science, too, is beginning to catch glimpses of this moment, though it hesitates to admit what it sees. In the final seconds before physical death, the brain doesn't just fade out, it does the opposite. It ignites. In 2013, scientists at the University of Michigan observed a massive surge of brain activity in rats just after cardiac arrest, gamma waves. The same waves associated with heightened awareness, lucid dreaming, and mystical states, surged to unprecedented level. It was as if the brain in its last flicker was reaching upward, outward, into something greater. This phenomenon, now observed in humans as well, challenges everything we've assumed about death. If consciousness is supposed to shut off when the body dies, why does the brain behave like it's waking up? Why does it flood with light, with energy, with patterns of coherence we only ever see during peak human experience? Because the final breath isn't a shutdown, it's a handoff. Your body, up until that moment, has been a transformer, converting universal energy into human experience. When that mechanism stops, the energy doesn't vanish, it returns, it shifts, it expands beyond the limited circuit it once flowed through. Just like when a light bulb goes out, the electricity isn't destroyed, it simply returns to the grid. But this isn't just metaphor. Your consciousness is energy, real, measurable energy. Electrical impulses racing through neural networks at over 270 miles per hour. Biochemical reactions firing billions of times per second. Quantum events collapsing into chosen probabilities to create what you call perception. Yourself, the witness behind your thoughts, is not a byproduct of matter. It's a pattern of energy temporarily arranged into form, and when the form dissolves, the pattern persists. That is the doorway Jung stepped through in 1944. When his heart stopped for 21 minutes, Jung did not enter oblivion. He did not encounter a void. He found himself floating high above the earth, not as a dream, not as a hallucination, but as a conscious presence. Detached from his body, yet more aware than he had ever been. He described the planet glowing with a brilliant blue light. He felt no fear, no confusion, only awe. And then, in the distance, he saw something that defies conventional understanding. A cosmic temple, a colossal black stone, ancient and eternal, suspended in space, and within that stone was a sacred chamber, a temple without beginning or end, built from the fabric of existence itself. Jung recognized it immediately, not from memory but from truth. He said it contained everyone he had ever been. Not in metaphor, but in actuality. He was there, all his lives, all his forms, all his selves. Time, in that moment, was irrelevant. Past and future collapsed into a single presence. Jung didn't remember his other lives. He became them. Every version of his consciousness, each archetype he had studied, each layer of identity he had uncovered in therapy sessions and dream analysis, converged into one being, whole, complete. And just as he approached the entrance, ready to finally step through the threshold and merge fully with what he now knew as the self, something interrupted him. A figure appeared. His doctor from Earth. He didn't speak symbolically. He delivered a message. You must return. Your work isn't finished. And just like that, Jung was pulled back, not because he wanted to return, but because something greater demanded it. He had seen too much, understood too deeply, and now he was a bridge, a man who had walked beyond death and come back not to comfort, but to challenge. When Jung spoke of this temple, he wasn't just describing a vision. He was describing a structure that exists in the deepest part of your psyche, a universal image, an archetype. What he saw wasn't personal, it was collective. The temple is what every tradition has tried to name: the soul, the self, the eternal witness, the part of you untouched by time. The temple exists in you. Not metaphorically, energetically. It is the blueprint beneath your form, the source code your life runs on. You may forget it in the noise of daily life, but it never forgets you. And in the moment of death, that temple reveals itself again, not as reward or punishment, but as home. This is what Jung meant when he said death is an optical illusion. He wasn't offering comfort, he was stating fact. The illusion is not death, the illusion is separation. The belief that you are this body, this name, this fleeting role in a chaotic world. But when the body drops, when the illusion is no longer sustained, you see clearly, you remember. You are not the mask, you are the actor behind it. You are not the drop, you are the ocean, momentarily shaped into form. And when the drop returns, it doesn't cease to exist, it reunites, it expands, it becomes something greater than the mind could ever grasp. But you don't have to wait for death to touch this truth. Every moment of surrender is a rehearsal. Every act of letting go is a glimpse. Meditation, silence, deep love, grief, awe. These are doorways to the same awareness, the same temple, the same truth that waits at the edge of your final breath. You may never see the cosmic stone floating in space, but you can feel its presence now, in the stillness between thoughts, in the moments when the world falls away and all that remains is being. That's the temple. That's the self. And that's what you return to. Not because you've earned it, but because you never left. Your final breath is not an ending, it's the last note of a song, returning to silence. Not gone, just transformed. And when you arrive at that silence, you'll know. You were never the singer, you were always the music. Everything you've ever seen, touched, loved, feared, dreamed, it's all energy. Your body is energy. Your breath is energy. Your thoughts, your memories, your sense of I am, it's all patterns of vibrating energy arranged into form. And there's a rule, not a theory, not a spiritual metaphor, but a law of physics, so fundamental it governs every atom in the universe. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. That's not philosophy. That's the first law of thermodynamics. And if energy cannot be destroyed, then neither can you. You've been taught to believe that when the body stops, so do you. That consciousness is this fragile, flickering byproduct of brain chemistry. That when the brain shuts off, awareness disappears. But that's not how energy works. And if your consciousness is energy, real, pulsing, electrical energy, then where does it go? Do you think the universe makes an exception for human awareness? That every law of matter and motion applies to stars, oceans, machines, but not to you? No. You are not the glitch in the system. You are the system. You are the same force that spins galaxies into being and collapses stars into light. The same force that turns hydrogen into fire and breath into words. You are not separate from the laws that govern reality. You are made of them. When a wave crashes onto the shore, it disappears. But not really. The water doesn't stop existing. It just changes location, changes shape. It flows back into the ocean, ready to rise again. That's you. This life, this identity, this body, it's the wave. Beautiful, temporary, but not separate. And when that wave recedes, you don't die. You return. You return to the field of energy you were always a part of. The source, the ocean, consciousness itself. And it's already happened before. Every atom in your body was once part of a star. Literally. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen in your lungs. All of it was forged in the heart of ancient stars that exploded billions of years ago. Those stars died, but their energy didn't. It transformed, and eventually it became you. You are the afterlife of a star, and if that's true, if death, even at the cosmic scale, is transformation and not destruction, why would it be any different for consciousness? You've heard the phrase, you are energy, but maybe you've never stopped to feel it. Right now, inside your body, trillions of electrical impulses are firing every second, neurons communicating through bursts of light and charge, fields of vibration generating thought, emotion, sensation. You are not a static thing. You are a current, moving, flowing, flickering through this body like lightning through a wire. And when the wire breaks, the electricity doesn't die, it finds a new path. That's the secret hidden in plain sight. You've seen it your whole life, in every sunrise, every season, every cell that regenerates and dies and regenerates again. You are surrounded by transformation. You live in the middle of an eternal dance of form and formlessness. creation and return. And somehow we've been convinced that consciousness, the most subtle, the most powerful form of energy, just blinks out. Just blinks out? No, that's not how this works. That's not how you work. Let's take it deeper. When your body stops functioning, when the heart stops beating and the brain goes dark, we assume the show's over. Curtains closed. But consciousness has never been fully explained by science. No theory, no model, no scan can point to the exact place where you exist. The brain lights up when you think, yes. But does that mean it creates thought? Or is it receiving something? What if your brain is more like a radio? Not the music, but the receiver. What if your thoughts are the signal, and your body is just the instrument that plays it? So then ask, when the radio breaks, does the signal vanish, or does it continue, broadcasting in silence, waiting for another receiver to tune in? You've never been the device. You've always been the frequency. And frequencies do not die, they shift. This is what the ancients knew, long before neuroscience, before electricity, before telescopes. They felt it, they named it, spirit, chi, prana, the force. But they were all pointing to the same thing, that life is a current, that consciousness is not locked inside your skin, but moving through you like wind through trees, temporary in expression, eternal in origin. And death? Death is just the moment the wind changes direction. There are people who've died and come back, people like Carl Jung, yes, but also thousands of others across time. They all say similar things. The sense of self doesn't fade, it expands. The mind doesn't vanish, it becomes clearer. They speak of floating above their bodies, seeing everything, hearing everything, feeling peace. They describe light, presence, connection, not as fantasy but as direct experience. Are they all lying? Are they all deluded? Or have they touched the same pattern you felt in dreams, in meditation, in the quiet knowing that you are more than flesh? You are not your body, you are not your thoughts, you are not your name, you are the energy moving through all of it. And energy never dies. The fear of death is rooted in forgetting this, in thinking you are the container, not the contents. That when the glass breaks, the water disappears. But that's never been true. The water just flows into something else. The music finds a new instrument. The light finds another vessel. And once you realize this, death stops being the enemy. It becomes part of the rhythm, the ebb and flow, the inhale and exhale of the universe, becoming itself again and again through new forms, new faces, new lives. There is no end. There is only change. And if you can trust that, if you can feel that truth not just as a comforting idea, but as a knowing that vibrates through your bones, then the fear begins to fade. Because what you are cannot be destroyed. Not in fire, not in silence, not even in time. You've always been here. You've always been the spark behind the eyes. And when this form dissolves, you'll still be here. Perhaps in a different sky, a different wave, a different rhythm, but still you. Not the story, not the mask, not the echo, the source, the signal, the presence. And that presence never ends. You've been told your entire life that your thoughts come from your brain, that consciousness is just neurons firing, that who you are is nothing more than the byproduct of biological activity, a chemical reaction happening inside a skull. And for a while, that explanation felt sufficient. It was clean, it was easy, it kept everything neatly contained. But deep down, you've always known something didn't add up. Because if the brain is the source of consciousness, why does awareness seem to exist even when the brain flatlines? Why do thousands of people report lucid, detailed experiences during clinical death? Moments when every measurable sign of brain activity is gone? Why are there memories from childhood that weren't formed through language, yet remain vivid like they were etched into a deeper fabric of reality? The answer is simple, and it's one you've always suspected. Your brain does not create consciousness. It receives it. Think of a radio. When you turn it on, it plays music. You can change the station, raise the volume, distort the sound, but the music isn't in the radio, it's in the air, in a frequency that exists whether the device is on or off. The radio doesn't produce the broadcast. It tunes into it, and when it breaks, the music doesn't stop. It just stops playing through that radio. That's what your brain is. A tuner, a receiver, an interface that allows the vast, invisible frequency of consciousness to express itself in human form. But the frequency is not local. It's not trapped in gray matter. It's not housed in a specific fold of cortex. It surrounds you, moves through you, exists with or without you. This isn't just poetic theory anymore. Leading researchers in neuroscience, quantum physics, and even medical fields are starting to admit what mystics have said for thousands of years, that consciousness may be a fundamental field, not an emergent property, meaning it doesn't come from the brain, it uses the brain. And if that's true, then everything changes. Because that means consciousness doesn't begin at birth and end at death. It doesn't rely on whether your heart is beating or your lungs are filling. It's like a signal that keeps broadcasting whether the equipment is on or not. You don't disappear when the radio breaks. You simply stop playing through that particular form. You've already experienced this in subtle ways. Every time you dream, you enter a world without physical input. Your body sleeps, your senses shut down, but your awareness continues. It builds landscapes, dialogues, entire stories out of nothing. And somehow you know they aren't fake. You've cried in dreams. You've fallen in love in dreams. You've faced death in dreams and woken up trembling because in that moment it felt just as real as anything you've lived while awake. So what is that version of you? Where does that awareness go when you wake up? What if your waking life is just another dream, tuned into through a different frequency? When people undergo trauma, deep meditation, or even near-death experiences, they often report leaving the body, floating above, observing their form from outside themselves. They describe conversations they couldn't have physically heard, locations they had never visited but later identified with precise detail. These aren't hallucinations. Many of them have been verified by researchers, family members, doctors, and none of them can be explained by the standard model of the brain producing thought. That's because the standard model is incomplete. And deep down, you know it. You felt moments where your body fades and something greater rises. Maybe it was during childbirth, or holding someone's hand as they passed. Maybe it was the quiet after heartbreak, when the world fell away and you could hear something whispering beneath the pain. A stillness, a presence, not yours, but somehow you. And that's the field, that's the signal. And once you begin to recognize that your thoughts are not the source of your awareness, but simply one expression of it, everything begins to shift. You stop trying to find meaning in fleeting circumstances. You stop defining yourself by a body that ages, a story that ends. You start to feel the presence of something that has always been with you, but hidden just behind the noise. Imagine how different your life becomes when you no longer see yourself as a fragile, temporary spark that flickers and fades. When you begin to understand yourself as a channel, a vessel through which consciousness flows, and experiences this particular shape, in this particular time, for reasons you may not yet remember, but will soon begin to feel. Imagine no longer fearing death, because you realize it's just the moment when the radio is turned off, not the end of the broadcast. And this isn't about belief, it's about experience. Because once you've felt the field, even just for a second, you can't go back, you can't unsee it, you can't pretend this is all there is. You begin to see how limited our definitions of reality have been. You see the cracks in the simulation, the flicker in the curtain, and behind it a truth so vast, so intimate, it renders every fear meaningless. What happens when the body stops? The tuner goes quiet, the physical senses dissolve, the interface loses power, but the signal, it keeps broadcasting, and it begins to expand. Untethered from the density of form, it opens, beyond identity, beyond time, beyond the linear story you once called you, and in that expansion you remember. You remember the moments that led you here. You remember why you chose this life, this name, this struggle. You remember that you were never alone, only asleep. This is what awaits when the veil lifts. Not an end, a return, a reunion with the field that was always holding you, even when you felt most lost, has always known. That quiet ache, that sense of something beyond the visible, that longing you've tried to fill with love, success, validation, control, that was never a hunger for things. It was a call to remember the field, to remember the source, and now that call is getting louder, because you're not here to play the part forever. You're here to realize you were never just the actor. You were the light shining through the screen, the awareness behind the scene, the witness behind the eyes. And when the curtain falls, when the body breaks, when the radio goes silent, what you truly are will still be playing, loud and clear, through every corner of the cosmos, because the signal never ends, only the device does. And you, the signal, are eternal. You may not remember it now, but there is a place you've seen before this life began and after it ends. A space beyond the body, beyond language, beyond even memory. It waits in stillness, never demanding attention, yet calling to you with every moment of grief, awe, silence, and surrender. Some call it the threshold, others call it the source, but in the depths of consciousness, it reveals itself again and again, not as an idea, but as a structure, a space, a temple. Not one made of brick or marble, not built by human hands. This temple is carved out of the very fabric of reality. It is eternal, indestructible, untouched by time. It doesn't exist in space. It is space. Infinite space that lives inside you yet surrounds everything. And when the body begins to fade, when the mind unravels its grip on form and linearity, this temple begins to emerge. Not as metaphor, but as memory. You've been there before. Some have caught glimpses in moments of near death, when the heart slows and the veil thins. They speak of seeing structures that make no earthly sense, grand halls without ceilings, pillars stretching into infinity, light that sings, silence that speaks. These aren't hallucinations. They're too consistent, too vivid, too ancient. They match across cultures, languages, and eras. Children and elders alike describe them, often without any prior knowledge, and each time the essence is the same. This isn't the first time they've been there. It's the first time they've remembered. It was during such a moment, outside of space and time, that the vision of the great stone temple emerged, not as fantasy, but as the symbolic architecture of the self. Inside this structure is not just peace, it's presence. It doesn't offer answers in words. It shows you. It reflects you. Every version, every form, every story you've ever lived, all converging into a singular awareness. And when that vision unfolds, you don't simply watch. You become. You feel yourself stretch across centuries, across lives, across identities you never imagined were yours. You look into faces that are both familiar and unknown, and you realize they've always been you. The farmer, the priest, the child, the addict, the teacher, the lonely, the powerful, the broken, the healer, the killer. You see them not as strangers, but as extensions, lessons, refractions of the one light you've always carried. You don't judge them, you recognize them. This is the moment known across cultures and near-death testimonies as the life review. But it's not just a replay, it's a reintegration. You don't watch your life as a movie, you feel it. Every moment of pain you caused, you feel from the other side. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, you feel its ripple in the hearts it touched. There's no condemnation, no divine courtroom, just understanding. Profound, undeniable, healing understanding. Because the purpose of this review isn't to punish you. It's to remind you, to awaken you from the forgetting, to reconnect the pieces of your scattered self and bring them home. And that temple, whether it appears to you as a stone monument, a tunnel of light, or a garden outside of time, it's always pointing to the same truth. What you are has always been more than this body, this life, this name. The tunnel of light that so many speak of isn't a hallway to judgment, it's a return path, a pulling toward resonance, toward the frequency of your true nature. As the body lets go and the senses fade, that light becomes everything. It doesn't blind, it embraces. It doesn't burn, it remembers. You don't walk toward it, you merge with it. And in that moment the separation collapses. The illusion that you were ever alone disappears, and then comes the reunion. Not in the way movies depict it, not just handshakes and family members standing in clouds, but something deeper. You reunite with souls who have traveled alongside you across lifetimes, souls who have played many roles in your story. In one life, they were your mother, in another your enemy, in another your child, your lover, your teacher, your shadow. And in this space beyond form, the masks fall away. You don't remember them as personalities, you remember them as frequencies, as soul tones that harmonized with yours to learn, to evolve, to mirror you back to yourself. And you see it clearly. None of it was random. Not the pain, not the loss, not even the failure. Every encounter, every heartache, every betrayal, it all shaped something in you. It refined your light. It carved your soul into a sharper instrument for truth. And in the presence of that truth, blame dissolves. Shame evaporates. You look at your story and see it not as a mistake, but as a masterpiece in progress. Because this temple, it is not just a destination. It is a mirror of your evolution. The more you awaken during life, the more clearly you see it in death. The more you integrate your fragments, the more expansive that temple becomes. And though it feels like something you reach only after the body fades, the truth is, it's been with you all along. Every moment of silence, every glimpse of peace, every time you fell apart and found a deeper stillness, that was the temple calling. Every dream where you met someone you couldn't name but somehow knew, that was a soul from the other side reminding you of home. Every time you forgave someone who didn't deserve it, or held space for someone else's pain, or chose compassion over control, that was the temple breathing through you. As it's not separate, it lives through you. And when you finally return to it, there is no welcome party, there is no gatekeeper. There is only presence, the kind that knows you because it is you. You don't need to explain, you don't need to earn it, you simply arrive. And as you step into that presence, you begin to remember. This is what you've been seeking all your life. Not safety, not success, not even love, but wholeness. And in that wholeness, everything you feared about death begins to unravel. You realize you were never going anywhere. The journey was never about escaping the world. It was about returning to the place within you that was never touched by the world in the first place. And that place, that temple, it waits in silence, not in the clouds, not in the stars, but in you. And when the time comes, and the body softens, and the breath slows, and the light begins to rise, you won't be surprised. You'll feel it like a memory resurfacing, a truth that had been waiting just beyond the veil, and you'll walk through that threshold not as a soul lost or afraid, but as a being returning, to the temple, to the field, to the presence that you never truly left. You were only dreaming, and now you are waking up. For centuries, the line between life and death was drawn with a single breath. When the heart stopped, when the lungs no longer rose and fell, that was it. Game over, curtains closed, you were gone. At least, that's what we believed. But belief is a fragile thing, easily shattered by truth. And the truth is, that line has never been as solid as we were taught. In fact, it's dissolving faster than anyone in the scientific establishment is prepared to admit, because people are dying and coming back, with stories that don't fit inside our neatly labeled boxes. And now modern science is starting to take notice. For the past 2 decades, doctors and researchers around the world have been quietly studying what happens to consciousness during cardiac arrest. They've gathered data, conducted interviews, tracked brain activity, and compiled thousands of cases. And in the most comprehensive of these studies, researchers found something startling. A significant portion of people, roughly 18%, reported being vividly aware while they were clinically dead. No heartbeat, no breathing, no measurable brain function. And yet, they were aware. Not just aware in the vague sense of floating peacefully. They described specific events, conversations that happened in the room, instruments that were used, details they couldn't have known, confirmed later by doctors and nurses. These weren't dreams. They weren't hallucinations. They were verified perceptions that occurred while the brain, by all traditional measures, was offline. Think about that. Everything we've been told hinges on the assumption that the brain generates consciousness, that when it shuts down, experience ends. But these cases crack that assumption wide open. Because if awareness can continue after the brain has flatlined, then something deeper is at play. Something that exists independently of biology. And it's not just 1 or 2 isolated stories. It's a pattern. The people who return from these states speak of a kind of clarity they've never felt before. They describe leaving the body, often rising above it, looking down and watching everything with complete detachment and perfect memory. They recall exact words spoken, movements made, machines turned on. They see doctors performing CPR. They hear the panic in the room, and they describe it all without emotional charge, just pure, neutral awareness. Then come the other details: the light, the tunnel, the overwhelming sense of peace, the feeling of being drawn towards something that radiates unconditional love, not like an emotion, but like a force of nature. Many speak of meeting a presence. Sometimes it appears as a person, sometimes a being of light, sometimes just a sense of profound intelligence. They describe being asked questions, shown memories, guided through a review of their life that is less about judgment and more about understanding. And here's what's truly staggering. These experiences are remarkably consistent across culture, language, religion, and age. Whether it's a child in Japan, a soldier in the US, a mother in Egypt, or a farmer in Brazil, the patterns repeat. The same tunnel, the same presence, the same sense of home. If it were just imagination, wouldn't the stories differ wildly based on personal beliefs and upbringing? But they don't. They converge, and that convergence points to something ancient, something humanity has sensed for millennia. The idea that death is not the end but a return, a transition, a dissolving of the illusion of separation and a re-merging with what we've always been. What science is beginning to document, spirituality has known all along. From the Tibetan Book of the Dead to the Egyptian pyramid texts, from indigenous shamanic journeys to mystical Christian writings, the message echoes through time. Death is not annihilation, it is revelation. It is the point at which the veil lifts and you see clearly, not with the eyes of the body, but with the eyes of the soul. And for all our technological advancement, we are only now beginning to catch up. There are hospitals now that leave symbols or objects hidden in operating rooms, placed where only someone floating above the body could see them, and in multiple cases patients have accurately described those hidden elements. Not vaguely, precisely. When questioned later, their stories matched not only medical records, but the unspoken events of the room. If the brain is shut down, how are these perceptions even possible? Because perception doesn't come from the brain. It comes through the brain. And when the conduit fails, the signal doesn't stop. It just operates from a different vantage point, one not limited by space, time, or biology. This is what terrifies some scientists, not because it's irrational, but because it's uncontainable. You can't put eternal consciousness in a test tube. You can't dissect awareness with a scalpel. You can't control what continues beyond the body. And for a world built on control, that's deeply uncomfortable. But discomfort doesn't make something untrue. The data is there. The stories are there. The patterns are there. And the more we study, the clearer it becomes. Consciousness doesn't end when the heart stops. It expands. Imagine being freed from the limitations of your senses, no longer bound by your eyes, ears, or skin. Imagine awareness that isn't filtered through fear, memory, or identity. That's what the people who come back describe. Not egoic thinking, not personality-driven thoughts, but presence, total presence. The kind that sees everything all at once and understands why it happened. And here's the part that stays with them long after. The peace. They describe a kind of love so complete it makes the human version feel like a shadow, a unity so absolute that the idea of separation becomes absurd. And when they return to their bodies, they're changed. The fear of death is gone. The fear of judgment is gone. Many lose interest in chasing status, possessions, or control. They've touched something real, more real than anything they've ever known. And it leaves an imprint that never fades. Because once you've remembered the ocean, it's hard to believe you were ever just the wave. So where does this leave us? It leads us at a crossroads. One path continues the old story, that you are a machine, and when the machine breaks, you are gone. Dust to dust, end of transmission. The other path dares to say what we've always felt, that you are something more. That what you call you cannot be measured in pounds or neurons or heartbeat rhythms, that your awareness is not the product of a body but the inhabitant of one, and when that body falls away, what remains is not less, it's more clarity, more depth, more connection, because death does not shrink you, it reveals you. It peels away the layers of identity and illusion until only the essential remains. The watcher, the experiencer, the light, and in that light there is no fear. There is only recognition of what you've always been, what you are still, and what, no matter what happens to your body, you will always be. You were never supposed to be afraid of death. That fear is not natural. It was planted. It was taught. It was conditioned into you carefully and repeatedly until you began to see the end of life not as a return, but as a failure, a collapse, a void. But this fear is new. Historically speaking, it's barely a flicker in time, because for thousands of years, across continents and cultures, death was not the enemy, death was the teacher. The ancient world knew something we've forgotten. They didn't run from death, they prepared for it. They studied it. They welcomed it as the final initiation, a sacred doorway that completed the cycle of human experience. In Egypt, death was not an end but a continuation, a sacred journey through the afterlife. The Book of the Dead wasn't a book of mourning. It was a manual for navigation. It detailed how the soul would leave the body, pass through tests, confront its own shadow, and ultimately reunite with the eternal essence it had always been a part of. They wrapped their dead in reverence, not in sterile silence, but in ceremony. They painted tomb walls with stories of the soul's passage. They lined coffins with spells, prayers, and protective symbols, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because they knew that what was departing wasn't gone. It was evolving, changing form, moving deeper into the mystery. In Tibet, the preparation for death was not just reserved for the final days. It was a lifelong practice. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardos, was read aloud to the dying to guide their consciousness through the intermediate state, the Bardo, between death and rebirth. It spoke directly to the soul, reminding it of its true nature, instructing it not to cling to illusion or fear, and helping it navigate the various stages of transition. Monks would meditate daily on their own death, not to wallow in despair, but to remain grounded in truth. Because to contemplate death was not to obsess over the end. It was to understand life more clearly. There was wisdom in remembering that everything you hold will one day be released, not to scare you, but to free you. The truth of death strips away what doesn't matter, and what remains, what has always remained, is what you truly are. But somewhere along the way we lost that. Somewhere between ancient temples and fluorescent hospital rooms, death became taboo. It became impersonal, sanitized, hidden behind closed doors, veiled in euphemisms, avoided in conversation. We started whispering about it like it was a disease, something shameful, something to fight, something to silence, and in doing so, we began to fear it more. Modern culture treats death like a malfunction, a glitch in the system. We've become obsessed with youth, addicted to progress, and terrified of stillness. We sterilize the dying, we medicate the emotions, we rush through grief like it's a problem to solve. We have hospitals that treat death like a failure of medicine instead of a natural conclusion to a sacred story. We lost the rituals, we lost the presence. We lost the ability to sit with the dying, not as doctors, not as problem solvers, but as fellow travelers, holding space for a journey we will all one day take. In our quest for control, we stripped away the soul from death. We replaced candles with monitors. We traded sacred space for efficiency. And in the process, we created a generation that thinks death is the worst thing that can happen. But the ancients would tell you otherwise. They would tell you the worst thing isn't death. It's never having truly lived. It's clinging to illusions so tightly that when death comes, you have nothing left to surrender. It's forgetting who you are so that when the body dissolves, your soul is lost in confusion. That's why they taught about death early, why they built pyramids and temples and rites of passage, not to glorify endings, but to remind the living to awaken. Because if you can face death with clarity, you can live with freedom. That was the secret. The final mystery was never meant to be feared. It was meant to be embraced as the great revealer, the force that exposes all masks, strips away all roles, and delivers you back to truth. Even the word death has been twisted. It used to mean transition, passage, transformation, but now it sounds like defeat, like failure. And yet, every cell in your body knows better. You are dying and being reborn every day. Skin cells, blood, thought patterns, beliefs. The old version of you fades and a new one rises without ceremony. Death is built into life. You're not separate from it. You are it, constantly becoming, constantly ending. And yet, we're told to fight it, to resist, to postpone it at any cost. But what if that resistance is the root of our suffering? What if your relationship to death shapes your relationship to life? When you're afraid to die, you live cautiously. You stay small. You avoid risks. You hold back your truth. But when you make peace with death, everything changes. You speak more honestly. You love more fiercely. You stop waiting. You start living now. Because you know nothing is promised and everything is sacred. And here's the paradox. Those who make peace with death are often the most alive. Their eyes carry a depth. Their presence feels different. They're not rushing through life. They're not trying to outrun something. They've turned and faced it. And in that facing, they've discovered that death was never a monster. It was a mirror that reflects what truly matters. You can feel it now, can't you? That quiet knowing that the fear you've carried isn't yours, that it was passed down generation after generation from a culture that forgot. A culture that traded reverence for efficiency, depth for distraction. But you don't have to carry that fear anymore. You can remember. You can choose to see death not as an enemy but as an invitation, to live more fully, to forgive more freely, to love more deeply, to let go of the story that you are fragile, temporary or broken, because death doesn't erase you, it reveals you. And the more you align with that truth now, the less fear you'll carry when the time comes. You won't need to be dragged into the next realm kicking and screaming. You'll walk through it like a soul who knows the way. Like someone who has lived well, loved well, let go well. That's the ancient way. Not to fight the inevitable, but to befriend it. to meet death like an old companion, one who has always been waiting patiently to guide you home. And when that day comes, you won't be afraid. You'll remember. And you'll walk forward not as someone ending, but as someone finally returning to the truth of who you've always been. Fear is one of the most powerful currencies on earth, and few fears run deeper, more silently, than the fear of death. It lives under everything, your choices, your ambitions, your relationships. It hides behind your desire to stay safe, to stay young, to stay in control. And though it's rarely spoken about directly, it's the shadow cast over your entire life. But here's what they don't want you to realize. That fear isn't just an emotion, it's an industry. Your fear of death is profitable. Your terror is a business model. From pharmaceutical giants to insurance empires, from beauty corporations to political systems, your anxiety about your own impermanence keeps entire industries alive. It feeds them, fuels them, drives the demand. You're taught to view aging as a problem, to see wrinkles not as markers of wisdom but as defects. You're sold creams, surgeries, supplements, routines, not to help you live, but to help you delay the appearance of death. It's not health they're selling you, it's a fantasy, that if you do everything right you can outpace the inevitable. But death isn't the real enemy. Your fear of it is. And that fear makes you controllable. Because when you're terrified of dying, you become easy to manipulate. You can be sold false security. You can be convinced to surrender freedom for protection. You can be told what to eat, how to behave, what to inject, what to believe. And you'll listen, not because it's right, but because deep down you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. They don't need to threaten you with violence anymore. They just need to whisper, "You might not be safe." That's enough. The fear does the rest. There's a reason death is always framed as a failure in modern society. Not a transformation, not a transition, a failure. It reinforces the illusion that the system is working to save you, when in reality, it's profiting from keeping you scared. Hospitals don't measure their success by how well they prepare you for death. They measure it by how long they can postpone it, even if it means stripping away your dignity, your autonomy, your spirit. Even if it means keeping you tethered to machines, sedated, hollowed out from within. Because every day you cling to life in fear is another day the system profits. There's no ritual anymore. No reverence, just billing codes, insurance policies, and a quiet desperation masked by sterile lights and medical jargon. And it doesn't stop at physical death. The fear bleeds into every area of your life. You're trained to fear endings of all kinds, relationships, careers, identities. You're told that anything that ends is bad, that you should fight to preserve everything. Hold on, don't let go, even when it's already gone. But letting go is not death. It's the wisdom of cycles. And that wisdom has been buried beneath generations of programming designed to make you believe you are powerless in the face of the unknown. Because if you knew the truth, if you really felt that death is not an ending but a return, then they'd lose control over you. You wouldn't need their promises of safety. You wouldn't obey out of fear. You wouldn't keep chasing the illusion of eternal youth in products that strip you of your soul. You would live differently. You would love more recklessly. You would speak truth even when it's dangerous. You would stop bargaining with life and start dancing with it. But that kind of person, that kind of awakened, deathless being, is not good for business. You can't sell fear to someone who's no longer afraid. You can't manipulate someone who knows they are eternal. You can't own someone who understands that their worth isn't tied to how long they live, but how deeply. That's why this truth has been hidden. That's why even today, when thousands of people have reported near-death experiences that defy science, the mainstream still dismisses them, calls them hallucinations, denies the possibility, not because the evidence isn't there, but because admitting it would crack the illusion. It would reveal that the system isn't fighting death, it's feeding on your fear of it. Carl Jung saw it clearly. He warned that when death becomes something we repress, it turns into a shadow. It doesn't disappear. It becomes dangerous. It festers. And systems that avoid the truth of death become systems that worship control. That's what we have now, a culture obsessed with immortality, terrified of surrender, addicted to control. But death cannot be controlled. It can only be understood. And understanding it doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from looking directly into the void and realizing that it's not empty. It's full of everything you've ever loved and forgotten, full of truth, of memory, of presence. It's not a black hole, it's a mirror. And the longer you avoid looking, the more power it has over you. The real conspiracy is this. You've been trained to believe that you're nothing more than flesh and time, that when your body ends, so do you. That's the lie that keeps you obedient. That's the lie that keeps you consuming. That's the lie that convinces you to trade your days for distractions and call it safety. But deep down, something in you remembers. You remember that death is not the end of the road. It's the folding of the map. You remember that endings are sacred, that the body is not who you are, it's what you wear, that this life is not your identity, it's your journey. And when the time comes, you won't need permission to let go. You won't need reassurance from the system, because you'll know what's on the other side. You'll feel it rising even now, in moments of silence, in flashes of insight, in the quiet sense that you're more than what you appear to be. And that knowing is dangerous to them, because a human being who knows they cannot truly die, cannot be ruled, cannot be manipulated, cannot be bought. They need you to fear it, because if you didn't, you'd be free. And that kind of freedom, the kind that makes peace with death, the kind that stands in its presence and smiles, that is the beginning of true life. Not the version sold to you, but the one you came here to remember, the one that was never afraid, the one that can never be destroyed. When the body lets go, when the final breath is released and the senses begin to dissolve, you do not simply vanish. You do not flicker out like a candle lost to the wind. Instead, what arises is a different kind of vision, a different kind of presence, one not bound to blood, muscle, or brain. What comes next is a passage, a journey through layers of your own mind, your own soul, and something beyond either. This is not fiction. It is the ancient memory that lives in your bones, and it begins the moment form ends. In the Tibetan tradition, this journey is known as the passage through the Bardos, transitional states of consciousness that unfold after death and before what you might call rebirth. But you don't need to believe in reincarnation to feel the truth behind the metaphor, because what you encounter after death is not a place, it's a process, a sacred unfolding. And it doesn't begin outside of you, it begins within you. At first, there's often a sense of profound clarity, not confusion, not chaos, but hyper-awareness. You may feel as if you've woken from a dream. The physical world, the hospital bed, the weeping family, the fluorescent lights, they fade like a set on a stage being taken down after the play is over. You're not distressed. You're watching it all from a distance with a calm that surprises you. Because in that moment, you're no longer limited by a single point of view. Your awareness expands. You are the observer, the witness, but you're also the field in which it all unfolds. Then comes the mirror. Not a literal one, but a psychic mirror, an encounter with your own unconscious, the structures you built in life to define yourself, your name, your job, your beliefs, your wounds. They begin to unravel. Not in violence, in revelation. You start to see them for what they always were. Temporary masks, archetypes, roles played in the theater of identity. Some of these forms are familiar. The child, the lover, the warrior, the seeker. Others are darker. The tyrant, the victim, the manipulator. They arise not to punish you, but to be seen, to be integrated. You do not run from them because you can't. They are you. And in this space there is no denial. The light of awareness is too strong. This is the beginning of ego dissolution. It's not the erasure of your uniqueness. It's the melting of your boundaries. The sense of me as separate from them begins to collapse. You realize that the parts of you that fought so hard to define and defend themselves were never solid. They were symbols, strategies, projections born of survival. And now, in the presence of this greater light, they begin to dissolve. What's left behind is not empty. It's full of presence, full of knowing, full of a kind of love that has no opposite. This stage is often experienced as both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because the mind doesn't like to die. The ego resists its own undoing. It may project visions to cling to, faces, places, scenarios. It may try to construct a new identity even in the afterlife. But the truth keeps cutting through. A deeper awareness keeps pulling you inward, past the noise, past the archetypes, into stillness. You begin to realize that even these projections, the light, the tunnel, the loved ones greeting you, are expressions of your own consciousness. They meet you where you are. They help you transition, but they are not final destinations. They are bridges. And then you cross. You cross into a space that is neither dark nor light, but pure. A state beyond form, beyond shape, beyond story. Some describe it as merging with a vast intelligence, others as entering a field of infinite possibility. But words can't reach it. Only awareness can. In Jungian language, this is where the self emerges. Not the self you constructed in life, but the deeper self, the archetypal divine center of your being. It is what you were always seeking. It is what witnessed your entire life without judgment. It is the presence behind every thought, every action, every breath. And now, with the ego quiet, it rises, not in pride, but in truth. You don't become the self. You remember that you are the self. And in that remembering, there is no more fear, no more striving, no more need to be anything other than what you are. Time no longer moves in lines. There is no before, no after, just expansion, just presence. You begin to recognize that all the lifetimes you thought were behind you, and all the ones you thought might come, are actually facets of a single gem, a gem that was always whole, always complete. You realize you were never alone, that every soul you loved was a part of you, that every pain you felt was a teacher in disguise, that nothing was wasted, that even your darkest moments were stepping stones to this clarity, that life was not a punishment or a test, it was a mirror. A mirror designed to help you see yourself. And now, in this space beyond form, the reflection is clear. What happens next depends on your readiness. Some souls choose to remain in that field, to rest, to bathe in its light, to integrate all they've seen. Others choose to return, not because they are forced, but because they desire to grow, to serve, to express love in form once again. But whether you stay or go, one truth remains. You are not who you thought you were. You are not your name, not your memories, not even your body. You are the witness, the field, the awareness that cannot be harmed or lost or broken. You are what death reveals, not what it takes away. And when you know this, truly know it, everything changes. Even if you return to the world of form, you are never quite the same. You walk differently, speak differently. You no longer chase what doesn't matter. You stop fearing endings. You start honoring beginnings. You live from presence, not panic. Because you've seen behind the curtain, you've met what waits beyond the veil, and you've realized that the veil was never real. It was only ever your forgetting. And now you are remembering, and nothing, not even death, can take that from you. You were never the body, not really. You wore it, carried it, moved through the world with it, but it was never the whole of you. The body is the vessel, the shell, the costume worn for this one particular act in the great theater of existence. It has weight, it has limits, it gets tired, it breaks. But you are something else entirely. You are the light inside the lamp, and when the lamp goes out, the light doesn't vanish. It returns to where it came from, undimmed, unbroken, eternal. All your life you were taught to identify with what you could see, touch, and name. You were told that you are your face, your name, your memories, that your story defines you, that your wounds define you, that your successes and failures measure your worth. But those were all shadows cast on a wall. Temporary roles in a play that you, the actor, agreed to wear for a little while, and deep down, part of you always knew it. You've had moments, fleeting, quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded and something underneath it all stirred. Maybe it happened in a dream, in meditation, or in the breathless pause after heartbreak. Maybe it was a whisper, during a walk in nature, or in the stillness just before falling asleep. In those moments, you didn't feel small. You felt vast. You weren't thinking, you were being. And that beingness didn't come from thought, it came from awareness, from the presence behind all the stories. That awareness, that's you. Not the personality, not the image, not the roles you perform, but the witness, the one who sees, the one who knows, the one who remains even when everything else falls away. Death is not the end of that witness. It is simply the end of the distraction. It removes the costume, the makeup, the lights. And what's left is what's always been there. Unchanging, untouched by age or pain or fear. The self, the still point in the spinning wheel. The body dies, the story ends. But the self cannot die, because the self was never born. It didn't begin when you took your first breath. It didn't form when you learned your name. It was there before that, watching. It was there in the womb. It was there when you cried for the first time, not as an infant in pain, but as a soul tasting form. And when the last breath leaves the body, it will be there still, unchanged. Think about this. You can observe your thoughts, right? You can watch them come and go. You can feel emotions rise and fade. You can remember your past, imagine your future. All of these things move, shift, flow. But the one observing them, that's still, that doesn't move. That's the real you. You've been told your whole life to improve yourself, to fix yourself, to become something more. But that implies you're broken, and you're not. What's broken is the illusion that you were ever just this body, this mind, this history. That illusion needed to be protected, defended, fed with ego. And ego by its nature fears death, because ego ends. But awareness does not. Awareness has no fear. It doesn't cling. It doesn't mourn. It simply is. So what happens when death comes? Everything the ego clung to starts to fall away. Your titles, your possessions, your relationships, your identity, they all dissolve like mist under sunlight. And for a moment there may be terror, because the ego is still trying to hold on. It's still convinced that it is you, but then something beautiful happens. The struggle ends. The holding loosens. And in that release you begin to remember. You remember that you are not the roles you played. You are the actor beneath them. You are not the waves. You are the ocean. And you have never been apart from it, not for a single breath. The self doesn't need to believe in anything to exist. It doesn't need proof or faith. It just is. It's been called many names. Atman, the Christ within, the Buddha nature, the witness, the soul. But those are just fingers pointing at the moon. What matters is the moon, the light, the presence that watches through your eyes, listens through your ears, loves through your heart. It cannot be harmed, it cannot be lost, and it cannot die. This truth is terrifying to the parts of you that want control. To the ego, this realization feels like death, because it is. It's the death of the illusion, the death of the idea that you were ever separate, small, powerless. But to the self, it is liberation. It is waking up. It's like realizing you were dreaming and that the dream was never the problem. The problem was forgetting that you were dreaming it. You mistook the dream for reality. You mistook the story for truth. And death comes not as punishment, but as reminder. As the final breath unravels the last threads of attachment, what's left is not emptiness. It's fullness. It's the return. And in that return there's no fear, only peace. Because what could death take from you that wasn't borrowed? What could it destroy that wasn't already impermanent? All the pain you carried, the stories of unworthiness, the struggle to become something more, they dissolve. They were never the essence of you. They were only the smoke. And now the flame remains, bright, clear, eternal. And when you know that, really know it, life itself changes. You stop trying to escape death and start living in alignment with truth. You stop clinging to form and start embodying presence. You stop fearing endings and start honoring beginnings. You realize that every loss, every failure, every moment of surrender was practice for this moment, the moment of letting go. And in that letting go you find yourself again, not as a name, not as a body, but as awareness itself. The self, the light behind the eyes, the silence between the thoughts, the one constant in a sea of change. And that self, that's what you've always been. Long before the body was born, long after it returns to dust, you remain. You remember, you return. And death, rather than being an end, becomes what it was always meant to be. A door, not to nowhere, but to everything you truly are. There's a moment, often brief, always unmistakable, when the illusions you've carried your whole life begin to slip. When the faces you've worn, the identities you've clung to, the stories you've believed about who you are begin to unravel. And in that moment, something ancient rises in you, not from memory, from silence, from the part of you that has never spoken but always watched. It doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a voice, but it sees. It has always seen. It is what has been witnessing every heartbeat, every thought, every dream. That's the part you were supposed to meet before you died. If you die before you meet what's watching you, Jung once whispered, you will carry confusion into the next world. Because death doesn't suddenly grant clarity, it removes what hides it. And if you've never looked past the mask, the moment of death won't necessarily liberate you. It may shock you. It may disorient you. Because if you've lived your entire life believing you were the mask, when it falls off, you'll feel lost. Not gone, not punished, just lost. This is why awakening before death matters. It's not a luxury, it's a preparation, not in the religious sense, not a checklist, not a dogma, but in the raw, honest sense of knowing what you truly are, beneath everything you've been pretending to be. Because the moment your body lets go, the moment you're no longer tethered to the senses you've relied on, your sight, your voice, your physical reflection, you will find yourself alone with only one thing, your awareness. And if you've never been introduced to it, if you've never learned how to rest in it, trust it, recognize it, you may resist. You may grasp for something familiar. You may run energetically toward illusions that feel like safety, but there's nothing to run to. The ego doesn't survive the crossing, not the way you know it. It begins to dissolve, not violently, not cruelly, but undeniably. And what rises in its place isn't a blank slate. It's your consciousness, stripped bare. No lies, no filters, just truth. And if you've never made peace with that kind of truth, it can feel like a freefall with no end. That's the terror of ego dissolution, not just in death, but in life. You can taste it even now, if you've ever dared to let go of control. If you've ever meditated long enough for thought to slow down and reveal the space underneath. If you've ever stared into your own eyes and seen something looking back that wasn't your personality. That's the edge. That's the threshold. And most people, upon reaching it, retreat. Because the ego screams when it senses its own end. It tells you you're dying. It throws up fear like a smoke bomb. Anything to pull you back into the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. It's known, and the unknown is terrifying. But the unknown is also truth. And the more you meet it now, the more you greet that watcher within you while you're still alive, the less you'll resist it when the body begins to fade. Because you won't see death as the enemy. You'll see it as a continuation, a homecoming, a deeper inhale after the long exhale of form. It's meeting what's watching you isn't a metaphor. It's not some poetic idea meant to sound mystical. It's direct. It's real. Right now, there's a presence inside you that isn't your voice, isn't your memories, isn't your history. It's the part of you that has remained the same since you were a child, the you behind the changing face, the you who has never aged, even though your body has. You know this. You've always known this, but you've been taught to ignore it, to identify with what changes, not with what remains. That was the mistake. Because what remains is your true anchor, your true identity, and when you die, it's the only part that won't be stripped away. Your thoughts? Gone. Your achievements? Irrelevant. Your relationships even? They shift form. Everything external falls like autumn leaves. But the awareness, the presence, that's the root. That's what continues. That's the part you were supposed to live from, not just reach for in moments of crisis. Awakening now isn't about perfection. It's not about reaching some enlightened state where nothing ever bothers you. It's about intimacy with the real. It's about no longer lying to yourself. It's about seeing the game for what it is, and choosing to stop playing by the rules of illusion. You're not here to accumulate trophies. You're not here to chase approval. You're here to remember, to touch the eternal through the temporary, to experience what it's like to carry the infinite in a fragile form, and to return home without regret. And yes, the ego will fight you on this, because the ego doesn't want to die, even metaphorically. It wants to be the hero, the victim, the achiever. It wants to be special, and in the silence of awareness, there's no one to be, no identity to polish, no story to prove. There's just now, and now is where the self lives. But the longer you avoid this presence, the harder the moment of surrender becomes. If you live your whole life convinced that the body is all you are, then death feels like annihilation. But if you've tasted the self, if you've sat in its stillness, even for a breath, then death becomes familiar, not painless but peaceful, not empty but full. Because you've already died, in a way. You've already let go of the illusion. You've already looked in the mirror and seen what doesn't age, what doesn't leave, what doesn't break. You've already met what's watching you. And so when the final moment comes, you won't panic. You won't resist. You'll recognize it. And you'll smile. That smile isn't relief. It's recognition. You'll remember that you've done this before. That death is not an exit but a turn. That the road continues. That the watcher goes with you. That you were never alone. And that is why this work, this quiet inner turning, this radical honesty, this unlearning of false self is so important. Not for applause, not for praise, but for freedom. So that when your time comes, you don't go confused. You don't go grasping. You go awake. The worst thing isn't to die. The worst thing is to die still asleep. To leave without ever having met the truth of yourself. To carry fear into a place that requires surrender. But you don't have to wait. You can wake up now, in this breath, in this body, in this moment. You can turn your attention inward, not to fix, not to analyze, but to listen, to feel what's already here, what's always been here. And when you meet it, when you finally meet what's watching you, there's no turning back. Because once you've met the eternal, you stop clinging to the temporary. You begin to live with eyes open. You begin to die a little more each day, not in fear, but in grace. And one day, when the final moment arrives, it will not take you by surprise. It will feel like something you've practiced for your whole life. Gentle falling into truth. And you'll go, not as a stranger in the dark, but as one who has remembered the light. There is no teacher more honest than death. No mentor more faithful, no presence more consistent. You can ignore it, deny it, delay it, but it will wait, silently, patiently. It doesn't punish, and it doesn't rush. It simply is. And in that stillness, that inevitability lies its power, because death holds up a mirror so perfect, so unflinching, that to truly look into it is to see everything you are, and everything you're not. Facing death doesn't make life smaller, it makes it real. It dissolves the trivial, the imagined urgency, the endless craving for more. It cuts through pretense and performance. It doesn't ask what you've achieved, it asks what you've become. It doesn't care how much you've gathered. It wants to know how deeply you've loved, how truthfully you've lived, and how fully you've remembered what you really are. But most people run from it. They flinch when the subject is brought up. They change the channel when it gets too quiet. They bury the thought beneath distractions, scrolling, shopping, scheduling, striving. Anything to avoid that silent companion walking just behind them. And yet, death is never far. It touches your life thousands of times a year, every time you shed a layer of yourself, every time something ends, a season, a belief, a relationship, a dream. You are not just moving forward, you are dying, over and over, in small sacred ways. On average, you take about 5,000 breaths a day, 5,000 reminders, 5,000 chances to let go. Every inhale is life, every exhale is death, expansion and surrender, again and again. But you don't think about it. You're not taught to. You're taught to hold your breath through life, to push, to accumulate, to postpone presence until you've earned it, until it's safe, until the to-do list is finished. But the to-do list is never finished, and presence isn't something you earn, it's something you remember. And death is the key. Every time you avoid thinking about it, you lose a little power, not because death wants control over you, but because your fear of it fragments your awareness. It keeps you in a kind of sleepwalking state, doing, reacting, performing, never pausing long enough to ask the one question that matters. What part of me dies? And what part of me returns? That question isn't philosophical. It's not meant to entertain the intellect. It's meant to burn away illusion. The part of you that dies is the story, the body, the name, the version of you shaped by time, memory, and culture. It's the identity you've spent your whole life curating. It dies because it was never meant to last, because it was never the real you to begin with. It was scaffolding, a costume, a reflection caught in a temporary mirror. But the part that returns, that part has never left. You just forgot how to feel it. You drowned it in noise, in expectations, in the belief that you were separate, that life was something you had to conquer rather than something you already were. What returns is the self, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as pure awareness, as presence that cannot be touched by time, as light that shines even when there's no sun. It doesn't carry judgment. It doesn't tally up your mistakes. It only asks one thing: did you remember me? Because the moment you do, everything changes. You begin to see death not as a thief, but as a revealer, not as something that ends life, but as something that strips away what is false so that only the real remains. You stop chasing immortality and start practicing eternity. You stop fearing endings and start honoring transitions. You start living from truth, not trauma. It doesn't happen all at once. The ego doesn't die easily. It wants a script, a guarantee. It wants to know what's coming next. But death doesn't give you that. Death gives you the unknown, the great silence, the falling away of all plans. And in that surrender you're asked to trust, not as a concept, but as a state of being. And the more you sit with that truth, the more alive you become. Not in the frantic, performative sense, not in the way the world measures aliveness, by productivity, attention, noise. No. This is a quiet aliveness, a rooted presence, a deep knowing that doesn't flinch when things fall apart, because you understand now, Everything that is not essential must fall apart. That's how the essential is revealed. And so death becomes your teacher, not just in the final breath, but in every moment that invites surrender. The death of an expectation, the death of control, the death of who you thought you had to be. These are not losses. They are initiations. They are invitations to come home. But only if you say yes, only if you stop running, only if you turn and face what has been walking beside you this entire time. Look at it, not with fear, but with curiosity, with reverence, with the understanding that what stands before you is not the end, it's the portal. It's the opening, it's the stripping away of everything that's not real, so that you can finally, fully remember what is. And once you do, once you really meet that place within yourself that does not die, you stop being afraid. You stop waiting for permission to live. You stop delaying your truth. You start speaking differently, loving differently, moving through life not with urgency, but with depth. Because you're no longer trying to outrun something, you've already met it. You've already died, in the best possible way. You've died to illusion. You've died to fear. You've died to the belief that your worth is measured by what you do instead of what you are. And from that place you live, fully, fiercely, without apology, not because you're reckless, but because you finally understand what's at stake. Not the length of your life, but the depth of it. Not how long you live, but how awake you are while you're here. That's the real metric. That's what death has always been trying to teach you, not to scare you, but to awaken you. Because the clock is ticking, yes, but not toward an end, toward a remembering, toward the moment you stop mistaking the dream for the dreamer. And when that moment comes, whether today or at your final breath, you'll be ready, not to leave, but to return, not to vanish, but to become who you were before forgetting. And in that return, in that soft collapse of all illusions, you'll realize something so simple, so staggering, that it brings you to tears. You were never separate. You were never temporary. You were never lost. You were always the light, and death was always just the door back to it.